Okay, so who's tired of talking about COVID? All right, so let's talk about COVID. Um, we almost didn't do this segment because we know everybody has a lot of COVID burnout, but it just doesn't go away. So it's a part of our lives, and it's changed how a lot of us do business potentially forever. So it's a pretty relevant topic. I am kind of pleased and surprised how quickly we all adapted to remote working, and how it was very acceptable to, you could hold a high level meeting and you could have dogs barking and running around in the background, kids barking and running around in the background, and it's all accepted. It's good. I think that made us a little bit more human, which I think is a pretty good thing. But I got to tell you the story. I was interviewing someone online, which meant I put on a good shirt over the t-shirt that I've been wearing for 3 straight days. And we're in the middle of the interview, and my mother-in-law needed something, and my wife was gone, so I'm the primary caregiver. I jumped up and went out to go help her, and I realized, oh shoot, she just saw me in my good shirt, with one button over my t-shirt and in my short pants. So I'm like, okay, that's not the most professional way I want to have myself come across on an interview. And I thought, okay, maybe as I was coming back, it's like, well, maybe there's a slight chance she didn't see that. So when I came back in the room, I got to the edge of my laptop and I did this. And sat back down in my chair. So, and as I'm doing that, I'm like, wow, this is what we've come to. So, for matters that are a little bit more important, we've got a panel here to talk about the different organizations and how they responded to the COVID lockdowns and everything. So we wanted to come up and have them talk about some topics such as, what builder activities were stopped, what accommodations were made so they could keep going on certain activities, what were the challenges, and possibly the most interesting things to me were what changes were made that worked out so well that you may just keep them permanently, with or without a lockdown. And then finally, are you ready for the next one? So we have today online Julie Krebs from the National Nuclear Security Administration. Julie, hopefully you can hear me and we can hear you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Ooh, a little bit of an echo, but we got you. Okay.
Is that any better?
Have John Dulin from the Defense Commissary Agency. We have Ismael Melendez from the Army. John Crittenden from the Navy. Bill Valenti from the Air Force. And finally, from the private sector, Frank Mondo from Jacobs Engineering. Let's give him a big hand for being up here. Very brave for them to be up here, so thank you very much, everybody. Julie, because of our mic issues, you're going to go first, and if you're ready to go, start us off, please.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yes? No? Okay, cool. Well, hopefully there's not an echo, and this is a little strange for me because, doing it remotely, I feel like I'm talking to myself at my desk here with my cat bothering me. So, and my husband's working behind me, so if he starts yakety-yakking too much, let me know, and I can tell him to quiet down, but he's back there laughing. So I'm Julie Krebs. I'm the Builder Program Manager for the NNSA. And as far as COVID, we did have a whole lot of changes. So, Paul, I don't know exactly if you want me to just run through all of them, but I'll just keep talking until you tell me to shut up on the chat here. So when we kind of look at our COVID response, there's a lot we've done as an organization that affected everybody the same, but we did have some very unique challenges both at headquarters and the site offices. So I'll kind of mention those differences as we go. But, talking specifically as an organization, it did change all of our mindsets. Many people were not in favor of telework to begin with, but have since changed our minds. And as Paul said, we all had to deal with the, kids at home and dealing with family members and juggling things. And yeah, I had an incident where my husband was shirtless in front of my boss on a webcam. So, it's the interesting times for sure. But specifically, what stopped during the lockdown? So all of our work-related travel immediately ceased for everybody that didn't need to go on site to work as part of their job, and everybody was sent home to telework full-time who could. So the only activities that kept going, like I said, were the field inspections that had to happen, classified meetings where you had to have a physical presence, those kinds of things. Even now, we do allow for limited work travel, but it still needs to be deemed a mission essential, and it has much higher levels of approval that need to go through the system. And you know, we don't support meetings or travel for meetings that have a remote option. So hence, I'm not there today, which I would have loved to have been and join you guys on the Riverwalk. But in order to stop a lot of the lockdowns, the NNSA did expand several employee leave programs to keep kind of people on the job and, you know, not losing folks to turnover. So, you know, they granted 4 hours of leave per shot to go get your vaccine. They paid administrative leave for, you know, having side effects from COVID. They authorized 20 hours of excused absence per pay period at the discretion of the supervisors for people who had to stay home and care for themselves or family due to COVID or their kids that weren't in school. And the DOE did establish a national virtual biotechnology laboratory consortium that kind of worked specifically on core capabilities that were relevant to the threats posed by the pandemic. And so they really took advantage of the different user facilities to address the challenges. Yes, I can hold.
For Europe for FY20. Yes, it was Europe. Of course, things started exploding in Europe earlier than they started hitting here in the U.S. We had concerns sometime in January or February, I believe. We called an RSCOP. In other words, I couldn't figure out how to get people there. I couldn't get people there. The consultants were in the same boat. We did was the contracting people, which I'm sure we all have to deal with, said that if I just changed location, the scope of work was the same, but the locations were different. I could just do a modification to a contract and it wouldn't slow me down. So come March of 20, we had a virtual meeting. This is how we discussed the changes in the locations and what we were going to do. I gave a lot of the responsibility of accessing sites here in the U.S. In this case, it was on the Eastern Seaboard to the consultant to do. In other words, they were responsible. If New York took a piece of paper, if Florida needed a piece of paper, if Maine needed a piece of paper, that they would work it. If there were quarantine, that was added into the cost. We tried to avoid that at all possible. They did go to the site, same number of team members, 3 to 4 people. We have bi-monthly meetings. We now have them virtually. We also have, of course, invoicing and questions, but most of that, matter of fact, it's the first time I've seen my consultants in a year, which is unusual. So, but most everything we have done is virtually. We started out, just like I think everyone else, we started out on Zoom. It was easily accessible. I wish I had stock in Zoom at the time. We have now progressed over to Teams. Whatever variation is out there, I believe we're using Teams most. Because of the ongoing issues in Europe, in DECA, we have decided that to keep going, because we basically divided up all of our facilities into 5 sections. So you kind of move across the U.S., do the Far East, come back around and do Europe. So there's 5. What we did, instead of trying to pick up Europe, we had a discussion, but there are still, I mean, I just read the headline that Britain just opened up for if you have your card. So what we've done for FY21 is move farther westward into the U.S. and picked up another 20 to 30 facilities that way. We kept the program moving, but at the detriment that our facilities in Europe, its data is now 7 years old, not 5 years old. But, you know, I do have maintenance people keeping it up. DECA doesn't necessarily do piecemeal. When we do an evaluation, we do whole facilities and catch whatever maintenance has picked up over that 5-year period. So we don't go year per year unless there's a big construction project. So I have mine is a little bit easier to control. What else did I need to add?
So are you ready for the next lockdown or pandemic?
We are to a point, we've got a lot of you know, as far as going forward on Teams, we'll probably continue using Teams, not bringing people all the way to Virginia to have a meeting with them, unless there's a need for a meeting face to face. And there are occasionally. I still like meeting my consultants kind of face to face and talking to them. It's a better interaction for us. I am now getting ready to do FY22, where I have to sit down and do the scope of work. And I'm watching what's going on in Europe because I need to pick up Europe. If it still continues to be a hotbed, then I will continue over to the US and almost do the last segment. At that point, my feet is to the fire. I'm going to have to do Europe or the Far East next. But I need to pick up Europe, and I don't know if I've solved that issue yet. I think some of the restrictions are changing, and I don't know within DOD. Like I said, every base has a different requirement. Do you wear a mask? Don't wear a mask? Do you need shots? All that is changing. So as of right now, of course, the government hasn't mandated vaccines, and they haven't mandated a lot of stuff. So personally, I think it's going to change. I think the last couple of days, I think you're going to see more people. If they want to work for the DOD or for the federal government, they're going to have a shot. So I think that will change things a little bit, but that's what we're up to now.
Thank you, John. Ismael.
Any questions?
We'll do questions at the end.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ismael Melendez. I'm from IMCOM headquarters. We take care of the Army. Before I start with the impact into the COVID, and I'm going to tell you where we are in this process because it's really important. The Army is behind. Oops, that's my computer. We're still into the initial assessment. We were the last ones implementing this. We accept 3 years into 1 year. I secured the funds to do it so we can be on time according with the deadline, with the executive order. Then COVID hit us. But the problem was that we left Oconus, the overseas installation, to the end to secure other fundings and align certain things. And then COVID came. That affected us so badly, we had to stop operation at the beginning because the misinformation outside was so big and nobody knew. Everybody was at the beginning touching surface, then they put the mask, nobody knew at the beginning. We stopped operation until and extend all the performance period. But before that, we went to headquarters DA to request an extension because we will not be able to meet the deadline. It's been a challenge because, like John said, every installation have a different requirement. Now every country have a different requirement and the installation too. We follow the country requirements, suddenly the installation changed the requirement. It was a nightmare to manage this. But we want to do it safely because we want everybody to come back home to their family. The mission, we have to do it, yes, but we want everybody safe. We've been adapting, trying to meet all the requirements, and at the same time, my PM went on leave. But we adapt. And what is the lesson that we learned on this? It was unpredictable. It was something that nobody saw coming. the Army, the whole world had to do that. I really appreciate everything that you do, and thank you for all your hard work, because we are trying to be on time. We still have some ups and downs, but we are working on it for other countries to get in. But the biggest thing is to everybody to be safe. And the misinformation at the beginning was so ridiculous. It was bad. But we are learning more, we are getting better and adjust everything, even our life.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Crittenden from NAVFAC. I'm from the Navy. I will speak to a little bit of how CNIC global installations, they're the shore claimant, the Navy's version of IMCOM, for example, had to address the COVID response. We actually, Navy's good at issuing op orders. We quickly addressed the need for in-house personnel to be able to access facilities. And for those facilities that had known or suspected COVID exposure, our March memo from 2020 discussed holding back for a 14-day period before accessing facilities and to shelter in place after potential exposure of that workforce. That only addressed in-house workforce. The contract throughout, Navy installations where we're outsourcing maintenance, they had to address on one-off basis wherever they were located. And a lot of times that's not as agile as being able to issue one workforce instruction. So presuming they hinge off of some of the NAVFAC policy for our in-house labor workforce, I'm not completely aware of all of the changes that were made out in the contract world, but I'm sure that they were slower to catch up, and that may have had impacts to contracts for base operating support services. In April, we issued some HVAC operations and maintenance protocol, being cognizant of the fact that we're trying to maximize ventilation. Of course, this is after all of the CDC recommended policies for social distancing, practices for donning PPE. PPE was, of course, another area of controversy. And so we're a fairly large organization, so we did not make any declaration that all of our personnel automatically go to surgical masks, because we were trying to recognize that there was a greater need obviously in the medical community. So there were guidances throughout, but it was a lot of local command issue policy about PPE. Not anything formal other than remaining away from facilities with known COVID exposure and to shelter in place. One last thing that we issued out was the return to workplace plan for the general workforce. These three things that I'm talking about, the in-house response, the HVAC O&M protocol, and the general workforce return to the workplace, they're all still in effect for the Navy a year and a half later. During the whether or not ICAP, which is the Navy's version of condition assessment, was affected, I would say not greatly affected. We've since caught up from any lag time in assessments. However, there are attempts that are made to try and schedule non-dynamic component assessments when facilities are less occupied. So there would have been some schedule optimization from an assessment standpoint. Also, it becomes more imperative that we use Maximo Anywhere. Give people, now that we're doing maximum telework even today, give people the opportunity to use Maximo Anywhere handheld devices, do their assessments, and be able to return to their home workplace to be able to enter data into Maximo. A lot of times Maximo Anywhere is used on an offline basis so that you don't have to have network connectivity when you're doing assessments. We are still, again, in a restriction of movement mode where when I go back to DC, it'll probably be a 2-week hold time before I'm back in the office. And then we also have a up and coming, what we call admin reset for the Navy, where we're going to try to take an opportunity now to investigate where we can reduce footprint and optimize workforce telework, as well as workforce staffing. And that's a NAVFAC push. And then also, I wanted to talk about how we have done some increased tempo of training online using Microsoft Teams now that it's cloud hosted, where we're going to use this opportunity to surge on our inventory costing. So using the NAVFAC cost book, I think there was a little video vignette earlier presented about the cost book that we have, and trying to use new tools now to surge, in other words, to bring components that we've never had prior to the advent of our cost book in Maximo, such as ductwork, piping, cable, conduit, those kinds of contiguous assets throughout facilities. And then, so that training has been increased. We've gone across most of the NAVFAC commands. We're training the trainer. PWDs are being trained by their local ICAP program managers. So that's been a bright spot, is to leverage Teams. Even before we had the version of Teams that we have today, our CIO at NAVFAC was pretty quick to address the need for video teleconferencing and remote connectivity. Last thing is we talked about, I think, next pandemic, what's happening, and it's hard to answer that open-ended question. I mentioned a couple of good things that are still in place, but the DoD-wide response is probably a more appropriate answer to that question. Issues that we had to deal with at the beginning of the pandemic, like PPE, that should be a foregone conclusion at the next pandemic. Increase in technology to maximize workforce optimization strategies and tactics. So those are the as well as, of course, supply chain and construction and operations and maintenance. So we have a lot of lessons learned to take away. Hopefully it gets codified into the future policy. Like I said, we've taken away a few bright spots. We probably need to be more agile in the contracting world, especially since 55 to 60% of all naval installations are outsourced in terms of maintenance. And ICAP world, we leverage the PM programs to perform those assessments. So it's very important that we not have a hiccup in our ability to perform field PM work. Go ahead, Bill.
Morning, everyone. I'm Bill Valenti, the program lead for Builder for the Air Force at the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. First off, the Air Force's response to COVID involves the thing they call the health protection condition, which is similar to force protection condition, or HPCON. And so everybody falls under that. And it's based on the installation commander's assessment of his local area, his or her local area, and the cases, counts, and so on, and whatever all they consider in making those decisions. And so that initially last March, everybody was locked down initially, and gradually were released. And as refinements were developed across the board, I don't know what all those specifics are, since we're a staff agency. I can just, from having heard from certain people, bases figured out ways, installations figured out ways to operate. I don't know what the details of that are, but I do know that because we run an incentive for facility condition assessments, we require everybody to have completed assessments and everything current, which means less than 5 years old. Last year's incentive was postponed because a lot of installations weren't able to conduct the assessments, which require being on site. This year, however, that program has been successful, and everyone's been able to conduct their assessments. Overall, what was stopped was from the Civil Engineer Center, we have a program where we visit each installation once every 5 years. So about 20% of the installations per year, which is roughly for us about 22 installation visits each year. We were conducting them, as normal up until last March, and they were just shut down for the rest of the season. This year it's been spotty as people are conditioned or considered an HPCon green or red. If they're red and had a 2-week quarantine or whatever, then we wouldn't go there. And so what we did instead was developed a virtual assessment methodology that we can use over Teams, and that's available to us. And we've done it several times. And so if we happen to not be able to travel or whatever in the future, we can certainly conduct those visits that way. And although they don't do everything that an in-person visit does, they do a lot of. And we've also been able to incorporate additional content from people who weren't able to travel with us in other parts of the civil engineer community, and make actually the virtual asset management team as staff assistance visit more robust than an in-person visit. Now, some of the other things that we did starting last March, once our team visits stopped, is we continued all the other staff activities because we were all teleworking. The Air Force fixed the VPN problem after about 6 or 8 weeks. Initially, there was a limitation on how many VPN openings there were, and so if you didn't get up real early and get logged in, you couldn't get logged in. So by about May, that was corrected. They got hundreds of thousands of more access points. And so we continued all the other things, such as the analysis of our data quality. We updated our assessment manuals last year for all the different systems. Because we're fully in sustainment mode, let me backtrack a little bit. The Air Force started the inventory and initial assessment back in 2013. And so for about the first 5 years ran a combination government with labor support contractor team, and went and stood up all the inventories and initial assessments for all the installations. In 2018, 2019, an FCA contract was run to pick up any loose ends that the first 5 years missed. And so now for the last 2 years, we're being fully in sustainment mode. So we've had to kind of revise our training content to reflect the focus on sustainment rather than the initial stand-up of Builder, because that lift part was over. And so we worked on that last summer. We're also developing an Air Force custom functionality module that we're going to be pilot testing soon, because we're just waiting on Mr. Bartles to get the scoring to work correctly. And so what we did to keep everything going after we got VPN squared away, we didn't have to do any stand-up. We didn't have to do any new inventory. Like I said, we were already in sustainment. So one of the things we developed is a robotic process automation as part of our sustainment effort, where when a project gets completed, whether it's a MILCON or a major renovation that has introduced a lot of new inventory, this robotic process automation is basically a script that'll run against a formatted spreadsheet. And it kind of automatically does the point and clicking, so a person doesn't have to do the inventory upload into the Builder software. And so you get the spreadsheet, you set the script using the UiPath software, you press start, and the thing just clicks through the whole whatever you have. And so we've tested that, and that's available to us. And although new inventory is not always a thing we do every day, but when it does come, it's a big workload. So if a bed down of a new mission, such as for us for the F-35, those bases needed this. So we developed that last summer. We've also, we're actually in the middle of pre-award on a photo documentation innovation using 3D point clouds and photosphere photos. Like I said, I can't really talk too much about that because it's in pre-award, but we're going to be piloting that in the coming months as a way to combat not being able to go see places, having this photo documentation, rather than have a team of assessors, maybe like 8 people would go and do an assessment, two in each of the four different major areas. Now we can have one person document by visual, by capturing the point cloud in the photos, and then the assessors can work off of that. So that minimizes exposure. Didn't have any contract deliverables going, so that was really not an issue for us last year. But we did develop template language for BMC contract situations as well as non-recurring facility condition assessments. And both of those are to be implemented as people are making their renewals, as well as we developed a soon to come out 5-year IDIQ for any installation who might want to get Builder updated contract support. So we're working on that. As I said, we're fully in sustainment mode. We also are, let's see. We also use Teams CVR. The whole Air Force used Teams CVR version up until June, which allowed both government and contractor employees to participate on Teams meetings. That's since been sundowned, and now we're on cloud-hosted Teams. Anytime when other contractors need to be participants, though, we're still using Zoom or WebEx video conferencing. And I think if another one comes, I think we've developed enough capability, both on the IT has served us with capability, but we've developed a virtual asset management staff assistance and some other techniques on how to sustain the builder system and be able to extract the value out of the data. And you're going to see a little bit more about that this afternoon. And so I think we'll be able to, do the most we could if we were to be, impacted by some type of pandemic or the continuation of what we're seeing already. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, Frank.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Frank Mondo with Jacobs. I'm the director of our assessment services practice and a retired Air Force civil engineer myself. Been in the builder community since the initial Air Force implementation back in 13. At Jacobs, we certainly had our hands full when COVID hit the world. We had a number of programs underway, as well as those that we were, preparing for in the coming year. So the primary workload that we had over this course of a year and a half or so has been in support of the Army, and for both IMCOM, Army Materiel Command, as well as the Army National Guard. We've got a program in Korea right now where we're assessing over 30 million square feet. The southwest portion of the U.S., we've got 5 installations. That is about 26.5 million square feet there. We also had Detroit and Picatinny arsenals that were underway when COVID really, happened. So those programs had to be paused. Anniston, Alabama, as well as Crane and Scranton Army ammunition depots were programs that were already in place for us, as well as 6 of the different state-level National Guard programs. So we had a whole host of startups as well as ongoing work that needed to be addressed and paused. So we had a host of different approaches to the way that we managed that process. But just like everybody from the DoD side, as well as I'm sure most of you on the consultant side, come March, April timeframe of 2020, everything came to a screeching halt. All of our travel was locked down, and that was a corporate policy that our folks decided. Of course, having safety in mind, safety first, we wanted to make sure that all the right protocols were being followed and that we were really taking care of our teams. So we locked down for a while. Everybody went into virtual working mode. Fortunately for us, we were in the process of sunsetting Skype for Business and migrating into Microsoft Teams prior to the COVID lockdown. So everybody had the software and we were starting to use it and starting to make that migration. And it was almost like the flip of a switch that we had to really dive in and use Teams almost exclusively. So that worked out very well for us corporately. For those of you that are not familiar, Jacobs is a fairly large organization of 55,000 people spread across the globe. So keeping operations flowing throughout that entire process, for an organization of that size is similar to the challenges that I'm sure each of the services faced as well. So migrating into an IT structure that supported that and being able to continue our operations throughout was definitely a challenge, but it's something that worked out fairly well for us through the process. As far as support of the ongoing builder programs that we had underway, we were able to use some of that time where we were in lockdown to do some builder inventory from drawings where we were able to use the as-builts, use technology like Bluebeam to calculate our inventories. And then when we were finally allowed to get back in the field, we used that as our template to validate the information once we got in the field. So we had the sections created for some facilities and some areas. We were able to do that where we had detailed enough drawings. Some facilities, we just didn't have that. And so we had to wait till we actually got, boots on the ground again. But we were able to, keep some of our teams, moving forward, moving the ball forward as far as the program execution. Thankfully, and I'm happy to say that we didn't have to lay anybody off throughout this process, which was great. I know there was a lot of concern over that through the course of COVID, and we had to modify some work schedules, and it was temporary, but we got through it. And once we were able to really get boots back on the ground, everybody was back up full running at full speed. One of the biggest challenges, of course, that you can imagine is the Korea program. Traveling OCONUS comes with its own set of logistics challenges, and then throw in, a global pandemic on top of that. It was definitely a situation that took some finesse. And I do want to thank Ismael and Jason Zeller and the team at Mobile for their flexibility and their support. We had to navigate through country requirements, the status of forces agreements or SOFA requirements that needed to be added to our contract, just so that we can start moving forward. As Bill mentioned, HPCon conditions, the Korean Peninsula was under HPCon Charlie, which is one of the most heightened levels of health protection conditions. So they were in lockdown mode for a long time. We were not allowed to bring anybody in country while the U.S. Forces Korea were in HPCon Charlie during that period. So what we were able to do, fortunately, we have staff that are actually in Korea, that are Korean nationals, and we were able to use those folks effectively through Teams, get them trained using the virtual environment to update that training program and adapt to allow them to get access to the installations and start the data collection. Now, these folks were, engineering and architectural professionals. They were not necessarily our builder assessors, that are part of my U.S.-based team. But we went through, put them through the paces, put them through our training program, gave them, that certification at the end that says, yes, you at least understand the concepts. And what we did is field those teams to start the data collection on the exteriors of the facilities. Again, that allowed us to provide the government the rationale to move the program forward, to continue the forward progress. Of course, we were challenged on the logistics side of that in Korea. There was a lot of local restrictions, country-specific restrictions. One of them being that we were not allowed to use any local hotels. So we had to reside, our teams, in private residences. So what that meant for us is we entered a lease agreement with a local condo right outside the base gate at Camp Humphreys, where we had to then quarantine for 2 weeks. I was part of that team back in October when we went. We had to have 4 COVID tests before we could, come back home. So there was 72 hours prior to our departure, another COVID test when we were on the ground, and we had support from the local medical brigade there in Korea. The 65th Medical Brigade was great in processing our team as we entered the installation. Then we went into lockdown for 2 weeks, and it was literally locked down. We were not allowed to leave our rooms. So we were in it was like an apartment complex, but everybody was in their rooms individually. Thankfully, we were, again, very fortunate to find a local realtor who delivered groceries for us. So that was awesome. She came and put the groceries at our door, knocked, and then ran away so that we didn't have any contact. But, you open the door and your groceries are there. So that was helpful. There was a lot of challenges there, of course, but we pressed through. And then after the 2-week quarantine, we were able to, put our teams out on the installation. And then that also extended our deployment schedule. So we had 6 weeks in country for the first, several trips that we had to go 6 weeks at a time versus our original plan, which was intended to be 3 weeks in Korea. So, there's been a lot of flexibility. And I think that, one of the questions that Paul teed up is, are you ready for the next one? I don't think anybody can ever really be ready for the next pandemic. But I think a lot of the lessons learned that we've implemented throughout the course of this past year and a half have allowed us to be smart and about making the right decisions on how to execute this kind of work. Some of the things that we had to put in place as well were local restrictions, where we couldn't have more than 6 people in a room, or we had to be socially distanced in a really large conference room space like this. So we had the appropriate, spacing for our morning safety briefings and things like that. Of course, everybody was wearing masks, and we had PPE. Again, Jacobs came through, with our corporate purchasing power. We were able to get the appropriate PPE that we needed and the hand sanitizers to deliver to our teams before they entered the field. But typically our assessment teams are a 4-person team. We had to split that out and have 2 persons per rental car. So that was another kind of pivot that we had to adjust, where we took on that added expense to allow the appropriate safety precautions. And that was a corporate decision. That was a corporate policy that we implemented. So that's not like an additional cost that we passed on to the government. That's something that we wanted to do for the safety of our teams. But throughout the entire process, I think we really, demonstrated the flexibility. Again, thanks to the Corps and to IMCOM for their flexibility in modding the contract as needed to give us the POP extension and those sorts of things that were required because of the additional lockdowns in Detroit. We had nearly 6 months of delay getting into Michigan because of the spikes that were happening there. So that portion of our work was significantly delayed, and we're just now wrapping that up a year and a half later. So it definitely took some flexibility and a little bit of patience on everybody's part, but we had a great team. A lot of folks, went through those quarantines without complaint, and I'm thankful for that as well. But they were so excited just to get out and get to work. They really hit the ground running, and I think it was part of the spirit of everybody wanted to do something to be productive and be part of the solution versus just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. So,
Frank, did you explore assessments by photos?
Not necessarily. And I say that part of that initial wave in Korea that we were able to do was through photos. Most of our team were taking pictures of exterior elements, anything that they could find architecturally as well as mechanical systems, and pushing that back to our teams based in the U.S. So they did an initial data collection, and then our U.S.-based QC teams would review that information and look at the data that they collected and help dial that in. So we weren't doing a full-blown assessment, but it was sort of a hybrid approach.
And it sounds like, from Bill, what you're saying, that the Air Force has embraced the assessments by photos. Is everybody comfortable with trusting the data that comes out of that?
It's actually
It's
actually an innovation initiative that it's actually in pre-award right now. But what we intend to do is to proof a concept for capturing the 3D point clouds and imagery, so that it's usable to a much wider non-technical community, but also for when the photos are current enough to do an updated assessment of. So we see other uses besides that, but that's one of the uses that we're anticipating, which is why I'm involved.
It's actually a triggering event for me because I used to work for a firm that if you made a recommendation or any kind of a decision based on a photo, it was a fireable offense. So if you forgot to take a photo, it was on your own dime to go back to the site and go figure it out.
Wait, if you decided based on a photo or if you forgot the photo? Which one got you fired?
If you made a decision or a recommendation based on a photo, if you forgot something and you went, oh, I can see it on the photo. It's like, nope, you got to get back to the site and look, put your eyes on it. So it's kind of a triggering event for me. So that's why I'm curious of how everyone, feels about trusting the data that is captured from a photo. Because I think I think I love the technology. I love the idea. I love the time saving, everything about it. And I'm just curious how you feel about the data.
Well, I don't think it's going to be really I don't know how many years ago that was, Paul, where you might have got fired from a photo, but these 3D imagery, is where you're, like you showed, like Kurt did in the summit video with the chapel, where you're kind of walking through and you can turn around and look at everything. It's a little bit different. I'm sure that would be fireable anymore. Maybe.
It may still be with that firm. I don't know.
One thing I'll add to, actually, I like the idea of using photo documentation as, especially for the aerial photography. And we really need to leverage that capability. I mean, we are DoD. And so there's really no excuse why. And that is probably more powerful than ground level photography, because we consider our roofs and the HVAC that's located on those roofs to be of utmost importance, and devil's in the details. So you cannot always see. We have certain hangars that are structurals that are cantilevered design from pre-1990s that have material loss in their structural members. And, we just need to make it a higher priority to rely on photo documentation, especially if it's aerial photography.
There is something else that happened. At the beginning, everybody said, oh, we are adapting everybody, teleworking is great. But then it opened another door. And we are having now attacks from other countries into our systems, different systems. And now everybody's rethinking about that. This is evolving. It's not going to be 100% teleworking. It's not going to be 100% at the office, but we are adapting to the situation and open other doors. The Army is more secure on that, and that's why aerial things, drones, and sending information like photo and things like that. It will take us a little bit longer, but eventually we will get there.
And I've got one more follow-up, and then we'll open it up. Remote working, is it going to stick around?
Who knows? More to come.
Yes. At least in the private sector, that we demonstrated that our ability to be productive in a remote environment. There'll be a return to work, and there will be a strategy for us to get back in the offices. Thank you. However, I think, at least again with our firm, we're taking a much more protracted approach to that and adapting our physical spaces there to reduce the footprint, if you will, because we've demonstrated the ability to be very productive while at home and continue. There'll always be a need to be in the office for some folks, and some skill sets need to be in that collaborative environment, need to have the tools and the technology that they don't have at home. However, I think a lot of us in the consultancy side of the business are going to continue to probably operate in a remote environment.
All right, questions from the room?
Test. John, Navy? Navy, John? How you doing? What were the HVAC protocols that NAVFAC put in place?
Okay, first of all, beyond practicing the CDC recommended guidance, right? There are things that can be done with facilities that have central HVAC. And so we followed the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force protocol, which is to maximize ventilation, increasing the amount of outside air within limits so as not to develop, greater than 60-degree dew point temperatures and mold growth. We also pretty much turned off demand-controlled ventilation, and it still remains off.
Did you enhance humidity in your buildings? Did you say you did not, or did enhance?
No,
humidity?
within limits. So 60-degree dew point temperature, trying to maintain no higher than that, even after hours, with the enhanced ventilation. And we do have a lot of climate 4s, climate 3s, hatch rate climate zones that are very hot and humid. So the humidification concern was always there, continues to be there. So increasing the ventilation demand, increasing the ventilation rates without an adverse impact to the facility, but also turning off where there's a potential for cross-contamination of exhaust back into the building, right? So your heat wheels, enthalpy wheels, making sure that they're bypassed so that they can't reintroduce the virus. So so those are the three things: increased ventilation, eliminating, pretty much turning off demand-controlled ventilation. So those two things are kind of intertwined, and then also bypassing cross-contamination potential.
So that was all process control changes. You didn't have to do any hardware changes or bring in new equipment, anything like that.
Like, did we put in air purifiers and HEPAs and things of that nature? No, but our UFC that governs HVAC design, the UFC 3.1 already requires MERV 13 filtration. Of course, there are many facilities that don't meet that criteria standard, but attempts made except locally to enhance HVAC capabilities. But for those facilities that had the capabilities in place, some optimization and protocol were required. Those continue to remain in effect. I don't know any adverse impacts to demand or from the demand control ventilation if there are energy conservation measures and energy projects, but energy savings became secondary priority to meet the moment of the pandemic response.
Did you look at using UV sterilization?
So emerging technologies we're having to analyze and potentially demonstrate. So having that UV capability of capture time beyond just the coil decontamination of bacteria, but also for the potential for arresting the virus. That's being looked at. I'm not aware of any installations where we've any applications of that technology yet.
We rolled that out right away in our laboratories.
Okay. I'd have to get with you to find out more about it.
So, Bill was with Air Force. You mentioned your virtual SABs and that whole process.
Correct.
And what you're attempting to do now with the pre-award, with the photo, 3D photo capturing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to include building more robustness into your hosting services for that because of all the large data demand that photography has?
Well, we're not there yet. This is an AFWorks innovation program contract effort. I don't know if probably you guys don't know this, but for the last 2 years, the Air Force has been running an innovation. They have what they call a rodeo, where kind of like a Shark Tank, where people bring ideas forward, and the ones that are judged the best get funded. This one came in third this year, and so it got funded. And so, like I said, we're in pre-award, and we're gonna basically prototype how we want to do this for the enterprise, with a small sample of, I think, somewhere between 25 and 40 buildings. We're going to do just to test it out and make sure that we have how we want to do this before we kind of go full enterprise wide. So it's a pilot project.
Gotcha. I would like to get with you later to discuss your virtual SABs and
I'll be here all day.
Lessons learned.
I also I have a saved round. We also worked on a artificial intelligence initiative to do roof assessments for aerial imagery. If anybody's interested in that, I'll be available in the lobby.
Can you repeat that?
Using artificial intelligence to conduct roof assessments and update Builder.
Beautiful. And then finally, Frank Jacobs. You might not be able to answer them both, but
All right.
the first one was with the virtual training of your national staff in Korea.
Yes.
With what you've learned from that, do you see that being something you could roll out throughout your enterprise, or was a one-off?
Sure. So the question was, will that virtual training be something we can continue to implement? It absolutely is. It's the same program that we're using for our U.S.-based teams. We were just fortunate to have a translator on the other end to help us translate through that. But it's the same builder training program that I would push any of my new assessors, new hires through, and we just walk them through step by step with a translator.
Now, to ensure the integrity of the product that you were capturing at that time, it sounds like you enhanced your reviews for the photographs and your QA team. And with those lessons learned, is there anything you could pass on, or would you rather keep that proprietary?
Well, that's a great question, Joe. So we did take the time to enhance our QC process. We had some downtime, and some of that, as you know, many of my consultant brothers will tell you, is overhead time or G&A time. It's not billable back to a project or a client. So that's part of our investment in our tools and in our process. So I'm happy to say that, you know, we were successful in making improvements to our tool, but it's not something that, you know, I would necessarily just be able to say these are the steps that we did, you know, and share that in a public forum like this. But I will say, again, it was part of the flexibility that we had to demonstrate and be able to utilize local staff. And to be honest, I think that was part of the reason, maybe, and I don't want to speak out of turn, that Jacobs was selected for Korea anyway, because we had local staff, because we had the ability to utilize and minimize cost for those, you know, those local teams. So being able to train is something that we've done, you know, throughout the years and continue to do. But doing this in a virtual environment, you know, and across the sea, certainly was a little bit of a challenge.
Well, I really like your out-of-the-box solutions for dealing with the logistics in country. That was pretty cool. Ismael, you may not be willing to answer this, but I'm going to ask you the question. Did Jacobs have to eat any of these extra costs? Were you able to get a mod for them?
Okay, you need to just imagine this. Imagine this. All my task order, all my contracts were awarded. I'm talking about 60% of my footprint. Then the pandemic came. The pandemic came without funding, period. We had to adapt. And no more funding available. That's the biggest constraint. What we did, we keep an open communication with everybody, and we were flexible. The contract was already in place. The contract might say, okay, the assessment had to be so many years. We might have to adapt to a new situation so we can continue. Korea was in a specific situation that the SOFA agreement will end in a certain time. There's no way to go back again. And I have to finish my mission. If another pandemic comes, I will fail. I cannot afford that. It took us a long time to get the approval for another extension. And yes, it was an open communication, bring ideas, be willing to adapt it, the contract. That's the best that I can tell you.
Kelly, any questions from the chat? Okay. Anybody in the room? Oh, here we go. We got a mic coming over to you.
For the aerial photography, we provide aerial solutions right now for most of our clients. But we found it really difficult to get certain waivers, FAA waivers, over the bases or military installations, and it's easier for the National Guard than it is for the main bases. How did you all overcome that? And that may also be a question for the government representatives in here. Are there now considerations being made to adapt to those waivers so these new technologies can be used?
Well, what what we've done so far is just used the aerial imagery the Air Force has already collected. And maybe our GIS rep wants to add on to this answer, but they already have a routine of collecting aerial imagery over Air Force bases on some frequency, some at least every 3 years, I believe is what their standard is right now. And so we just took advantage of the fact that exists and used it. So we didn't have to hire new flyovers in most cases. There are some locations that are remote or aren't near a metropolitan area and don't get flew over, so that need to be paid for. But that's managed through our GIS area. It's not my area. So we're just another customer of what they're doing. And I know it doesn't really answer your question, but that's all I know about it. Mr. Sofka, I think, wants to add on. He's got more info than I do.
One area that the Air Force Geobase Office has also been exploring and implementing is small unmanned aerial systems. The Geobase Office has, I guess, sort of broke the code with AVFAC A3U. Not too sure on that, but they're being able to set up the standard operating procedures to send SUAS teams out to all of the OCONUS installations. I believe they have the spectrum approval and clearances and can conduct, capture the imagery, and I believe use the artificial intelligence to conduct the roof assessments, if that's correct.
Whatever the source of the imagery is, we're going to be able to use the AI algorithms we're developing to do the roof assessment, and we've developed an API procedure that will update the builder inventory with that updated assessment data. And besides the SUAS flying the aerial imagery in general, we're also anticipating using that, for a close-up inspection of things that the higher level aerial imagery identifies, but we maybe can't quite tell what's going on. We intend to use the SUAS to take a closer look. We haven't done that yet, but that's our intent.
The kind of follow-on question to what is needed to fly in the areas. I'd like more information from you on that. Is it still the idea that the UAS systems need to be manufactured in the United States? And that's been a big restriction also. So we've had to adapt our systems and buy systems that are just built here. Do you know if that's been resolved with them?
Sorry, just three.
The Geobase Office has identified a number of systems, I believe 3 or 4, Blue UAS that are manufactured within the United States. I believe the Paranafi, that's the only one I can remember off the top of my head. There's 3 other ones. Wingtra 1 is another one that they have purchased and procured for testing. They performed some testings with the vendors at Tyndall Air Force Base. And right now they're in the process of getting the vendor training so that they can conduct knowledge transfer to the installations that will be setting up their own SUAS programs following the operating procedures that the Geobase Office has developed. Over.
Any other questions? All right. Let's thank our panel. Thank you, everybody. We went a little bit over on that, so we were going to come back at 1 after lunch, but let's go to 1:15. And we'll start the sessions at 1:15. 1:15. 1:15. Thanks, everybody.